Welcome to the Tzohar Olami, a Gay to the World podcast. Today, 27th of January, is the International Holocaust Remembrance Day. From here in Israel, I want to go all the way to Sweden in order to touch on a subject that's a bit sensitive. The Swedish Democrats, anti-Semitism, and the party's approach to the Holocaust. A brief introduction. I arrived in Sweden in September 2018 in order to help to the Moderaterna party in the election that were being held at that time. In every place that I arrived, I was told how much the Swedish Democrats are problematic and how not a small number of their supporters are fascists, anti-Semites, or neo-Nazis. Many testimonials were told again and again and again. On the other hand, it is hard to ignore the fact that the party's leadership and prominent members are doing everything in order to combat the phenomenon. If you typed in Google the term Swedish Democrats, you'll find endless results of the connection between the party and racism and anti-Semitism. On the other hand, you'll also find that the party's leadership and not a small number of its members have really no connection to this phenomenon. So here it is. On this day, I wish to examine where the Swedish Democrats came from, where are they now, and where are they heading to. With me the first one is Mattias Karlsson. He's a Swedish politician who served as a leader of the Sweden Democrats in the Reichstag from September 2014 to November 2019. He has been a member of the Reichstag for the Scania County since October 2010. He previously served as a leader of the Swedish Democrats from 2014 to 2015. He currently heads the conservative think tank Oikos. Second one, Charlie Weimers, an MEP from Sweden since 2019. In the past, he was a senior member of the Christian Democrats and currently a member of the Swedish Democrats, part of the ECR, European Conservatives and Reformists. And last but not least, Angelika Bengtsson, originally from Malmö, an MP for the Sweden Democrats since 2014. She is also a member of the Nordic Council and the Cultural Committee of the Swedish Parliament and one of the party's spokespersons when it comes to matters regarding national minorities. Gentlemen, lady, I want to start. And first question, Mattias, is to you. What do you say to people that question your past, that see problematic and worrying phenomena in the party, or at least in some of its members? The evidence doesn't leave any room for doubt.
Thank you very much. Yeah, to be honest, I don't have any quarrels with people who say that we have a problematic past. I believe so myself. And the truth is that I first started thinking about joining this party in 1994. The party was founded in the 80s. And I went to a meeting in 1994, and I was deeply disappointed with what I saw. I thought that the party program was very good. It was democratic, was anti-racist, it was patriotic and conservative. But what I saw among the members in my local city made me really disappointed. There were racist people there. So I thought that I could not join the party in 1994. I waited several years before I joined myself. And so it's no question about it. In the early years, there was a lot of mistakes being made. Even leading members had really problematic views. For the first years. It was a shift in 1995, though, when the first party chairman had to leave and was replaced with another chairman who came from a more established background. And I think ever since then, we have been on a journey that has completely transformed the party from what it was to what it is today. At that time, we had a few hundred members, and as it always often is with new parties, a lot of fringe people, a bit weird opinions. They go to this new outsider parties. But today, we have grown to become one of Scandinavia's biggest political movements, and I think we have changed to our core in all aspects. And for me personally, my first internal conflict in the party was with a fraction, the last remaining fraction that had radical and in some cases anti-Semitic views. And we fought them really hard and we kicked them out of the party. This was already in the 1990s. And after that, my first external conflicts was when I was a member of the local parliament in Malmö, or I was active in the local politics in Malmö, our third largest city. And there has been a very big problem with anti-Semitism in Malmö. We had a local mayor from the Social Democrats who said basically that the Jews who was being persecuted in Malmö, they had to blame Israel because it was Israel's fault that they were being persecuted. He banned Israel from playing sports, tennis in Malmö, and he joined demonstrations where radical Muslim fractions were chanting anti-Semitic slurs. So we fought him really hard. So this has followed me, I think, throughout my career. And I think personally, I don't feel ashamed. I feel ashamed for the history of the past of my party, but I think that we have tried, me and the current party leadership has tried as hard as we can to try to remedy the mistakes of the past. And I think in a large sense, we have at least succeeded. And I think like one telling episode, I think, is that a couple of years ago, there was a big political festival in Sweden, and the Swedish-Israeli Friendship Alliance was physically attacked by real neo-Nazis in Sweden. And among all the hundreds of organizations that were at this political festival, they choose to seek refuge with us because they knew that the Sweden Democrats were the ones who was most likely to defend them. And we did also, and we paid for security guards and we gave them shelter. And I think that tells you at least something about the change that the party has gone through.
No, thank you. You know that your critics say that your aim is that the Jews in Israel will whitewash you. How do you respond to this claim?
To be honest, I think that I don't really feel that we have a need to be whitewashed anymore. As I said, we have a problematic past. It goes back to the 80s and the early 90s. But today we are, as I said, one of the largest political organizations in Scandinavia. The moderate party that you mentioned, they are now open to cooperation with us. We have been accepted by the big established ECR group in the European Parliament. And we are growing still and have a good chance of becoming the second largest party in Sweden. So, and no offense, this is not my views, but Sweden has been a socialist country for many, many decades. And a lot of Swedes have been fed the lie that Israel is a racist nation who treats its minorities really badly, and especially that Israeli conservatives are horrible fascists, like some people say about me. So I'm not even sure that it will benefit me to reach out to you within some parts of the Swedish populations. I do it because I really support Israel. I think that your struggle is a moral struggle. I believe that the world has a special obligation to help the Jewish people in light of all the suffering that you have been subjected to. I see Israel as a part of the Western world, and I think that we need to cooperate within that. I think Israel and Sweden has many common interests, and I want to build also a stronger international conservative movement. So that is my reasons for reaching out to you and talking to you. I don't really, to be honest, believe that it will benefit me with the voters of Sweden. And so, yeah, that's the honest answer.
Charlie, I'm asking you, you were a member of the Christian Democrats for so many years. If I remember correctly, you were the chairman of the youth, and you moved to the Swedish Democrats. You were elected by them to be the representative and MEP in the European Parliament. Why did you choose Swedish Democrats? You know, it seems odd to many people from outside.
Well, to understand my journey, I think you have to take a look at Sweden's journey during the last decades. Because during the last decade, Sweden has gone from one of the world's most cohesive societies to a situation where 20% of our population is foreign-born. That is a revolutionary change. And society has increasingly come under pressure because of it. Sweden is no longer the Bullerby of Astrid Lindgren. It's no longer one of the world's safest countries. Segregation is out of control. We have a rapid growth of vulnerable areas, that is, immigrant areas where Swedish culture is largely absent, unemployment rampant, and rule of law all but gone. Growth of Islamism. Sweden has been one of Europe's largest exporters of jihadists per capita. Growth in crime. Organized crime is like nothing we've ever seen. Shootings, bombings on a level of a country at war, one expert said. Sexual crimes are on the rise, and so are robberies. Not least robberies that have been coined domination violence, where Swedish boys have been sought out by individuals with immigrant backgrounds in order to be humiliated. Some of the most infamous cases here include torture, urination on the victim, and even rape. Brute violence. A new term to describe the victims of this has been coined, Generation Prey. These are just a few examples. Another thing that made a huge impact on me was the deteriorating situation for Jews in Sweden. Anyone with open eyes could see that this was the result of mass migration. But the establishment refused to admit it. One of the Swiss journalists that I admire the most, Paulina Neuding, herself a Jewess, expressed her worry, anxiety, and frustration over the willful ignorance, political correctness of our politicians in the New York Times and other international publications. As a Christian Democrat, I could share her articles on social media, sure, but could I speak freely about anti-Semitism being imported to Sweden through migration from the Middle East? Of course, it existed already before mass migration, but problems were exacerbated on an extreme level with this. I could not express that as a Christian Democrat, and that was extremely demoralizing for me, because I realized that the Jews in Sweden indeed were the canaries in the coal mine. If they no longer feel at home in Sweden, our whole society is terrible. Working for the Christian Democrats, I traveled a lot to the Middle East, including Lebanon and Iraq, during the height of ISIS. And I met Oriental Christian IDPs and refugees. Their stories of Islamist hatred against infidels, kuffar, touched me deeply, but they also alarmed me. Because what they said was, of course, that the anti-Christian hatred did not start with ISIS. It was there long before. And for me, the thought of having whole districts in Sweden and Western Europe where that oppressive mentality influences or even dominates people's lives is unbearable. One experience that made a lasting impression on me was when I stood at the tomb of the prophet Nahum in the small Christian town of Al-Qarsh in northern Iraq. A very old Christian man opened the tomb for us with keys that he was entrusted with by the town's last Jewish family at the expulsion of Jews from the Arab world. Who will be here to look after the tomb when the last Christians are gone? I remember thinking. First they came for the Jews, the canaries in the coal mine. Soon there will be no Christians in the cradle of Christianity because of Islamic extremism. And in Sweden, during the last weeks, we've seen 2 arson attacks against the church in the direct proximity of one of the most segregated areas outside Stockholm. As a conservative, I realized my moral obligation was to actually put myself out there in order to stop this development in Sweden and in Western Europe.
Tell me, what does the party do in order to combat anti-Semitism and racism? And also, this is something of my personal interest. What's the party's stance on the religious ritual of circumcision? And this is something which is very sensitive in Israel. I must tell you that there is no law in Israel for circumcision, but 99% of the population is circumcised. Their children, most of them, seculars.
Yes, thank you, Eli. One of the reasons I felt compelled to join the Sweden Democrats was because I realized that the party had done a whole lot in order to rid the party of extremism. Since the election of Jimmie Åkesson as leader, the party has been very strong to combat anti-Semitism and racism in Sweden and has adopted a zero-tolerance policy. Several members have been expelled for expressing extremist views of the party, and I fully support these issues. The Youth Association was purged because of its extremist and identitarian tendency. The party also had pro-Israeli policies, and the view on Israel is, for me personally, something of a litmus test for patriotic parties in Europe. In terms of combating anti-Semitism, like other places, the SD is not afraid of pointing out the connection between mass migration and the worst security situation in Sweden. The party also criticizes media and leftist hyperbole on Middle Eastern politics, as we know that this could pave the way for violence against Jews, such as the Molotov cocktail attack against the Gothenburg synagogue that followed the move of the U.S. Embassy to Jerusalem. The SD stands for cultural nationalism opposed to ethnic nationalism. This means an inclusive view on Swedish. Come to our country, work hard, abide the law, learn our norms, become part of society. You want to identify as a Swede, then you can become a Swede. That is the opposite of racism. So, circumcision. As a strong supporter of freedom of religion, I support allowing the practice to continue within the Jewish community. The SD party line, however, is opposed. I would like to stress that this has nothing to do with the Jewish community specifically, but has to be understood, in my opinion, within the larger discussion and tension between secularism and religion that we see in our Western societies. First, the discussion in Sweden against circumcision very much stems from a secularist view and framing it within the context of children's rights and bodily integrity. That is why, for instance, the Liberal Center Party has the same view as SD on this issue. Secondly, this is a tension that also goes beyond the Jewish community. For example, many practicing Christian doctors have expressed their discomfort or described the pressure that they feel when their own religious beliefs and conscience run counter to the often legal and socially accepted medical practices of, for example, abortion and euthanasia. This topic that is not very much discussed in the public debate because of fear that these doctors have of being fired. However, it very much exists. Another example of this tension that you may remember between fervent secularism and religion can be seen in the court case of a British Christian attendant who wanted to wear a necklace with a cross. British Airways told her to wear any visible over her uniform. This then went all the way to the European Court of Human Rights. Therefore, I think that the discussion of circumcision should not be framed within the context of anti-Semitism, but rather in the context of the tension that we see increasingly in Western societies between religion and religious practices on the one hand, and this strong secularist thinking to do away with almost anything that is religion on the other hand. As a society, I believe that this is a profound discussion that we ought to have. What kind of society do we want to live in? In the journey to ensure everyone's rights and dignity, do we not perhaps overlook other people's rights to freedom of religion or deny them even those rights? To what degree should we balance those two belief systems? These are hard questions. They need to be debated.
Thank you. Angelika, last but not least, as I said, I want to ask you, because you have a very interesting story. You have a Jewish origins. Your grandfather was a Polish Jew who fled the persecutions during World War II into Sweden. You know, a lot of Israelis would ask themselves, how come you have a Jewish origins and you are in the Swedish Democrats before they know the story led by Mattias, Charlie, and all the other fellows. So when did you join the party and for what reasons?
So yes, my grandfather was Jankiel Hashkes. I have a picture here of Jankiel, my grandmother, my mother, her brother, and her sister. And I joined the Sweden Democrats in September 2009. That was exactly 1 year before we entered the Riksdag, which is our parliament. And I had two major reasons. I felt more and more unsafe in my own city of Malmö, especially at night time. This was in close connection to two national elections, and the Sweden Democrats was transforming into an established party at the political arena. And when I studied the actual policies of the Sweden Democrats, I found it trustworthy and well thought out. And especially in a country that had been governed by the Socialist Party for decades. And I've never questioned my choice of becoming a member. On the contrary, I actually am more convinced today than ever before.
Okay, and you hear the criticism against your party that this is an anti-Semite party, racist, and even neo-Nazi to some extent. What is your response to such accusations? What would you say to people who accuse you of this kind of allegations?
I would say that they are wrong, they are plain, and they are simple. I have never once met a party member that has looked down on me because of my Jewish heritage. The party has, at indictions of racist or anti-Semitic remarks at any level, acted and banned that person for life because they have no place in the Sweden Democratic Party. And let me just tell you a little bit why my grandfather and why my family actually landed in Sweden. He was born, my grandfather, Jankiel, he was born in a small village called Siemityce. It's 100 kilometers from Białystok. In Białystok, a ghetto was established in 1941. They established two ghettos, one on each side of the river called Biała River that runs through Białystok. It was about 90,000 people living in Białystok, and 43% were Jews. But within the first weeks, when this ghetto was established, 6,000 Jews were killed by the SS and police groups. 2 years later, in 1943, the Nazis started an operation to liquidate the ghetto. 7,600 Jews were deported to a transit camp, and then to Majdanek or Auschwitz, and 10,000 were deported to Treblinka. During this deportation from the ghetto, the underground Jewish resistance started a revolt against the Nazis, but only lasted for 5 days, and 100 of fighters were killed. 100 managed to escape and joined the partisan unit. Leaders of the uprising committed suicide in order to not come under Nazi control. One of them, Heike Grossman, he was one of the organizers of the underground movement and participated in the revolt. She became a member of Knesset, and she was from Białystok, the same city as my grandfather, Jankiel. Jankiel Hashkes, I unfortunately never met, but he was a brave man. He had 2 brothers and 1 sister. He also had 2 sons. They all were separated in the ghetto, and he never saw them again. We don't know what happened to them, to his family. Either they were one of the thousands of Jews deported to camps, or most unlikely, they managed to escape to safety. My mom's greatest wish is to find out what happened to them. But after the war, or actually during 1944, somehow my grandfather, he managed to escape the ghetto and flew 100 kilometers to the city he was born in, Subtitles. He found a family who was willing to hide him in their basement for almost a year until the war ended. In 1946, he met my grandmother, and my mom was born 3 years later. And during my mother's childhood, she never spoke openly about her Jewish heritage. But after the decade of communism, more Jews of Polish descent opened up and shared the Jewish family history. And why did my family ended up in Malmö? Well, after the war, when Sweden opened up to receive Jewish family from the war-torn Europe, my aunt and uncle took this opportunity. My grandparents hesitated. Yankel, he was old and he was weak after the struggle in the ghetto and wanted to migrate to Israel. He died, unfortunately, in 1978. Shortly after, my grandmother went to Sweden and my mother followed some years later. And then I was born in 1990, and that was when she met my father.
Okay.
And this grace and shame on because of our Jewish heritage, I felt during my childhood in Malmö. And as you might know, several hundred Jewish families have left Malmö in recent years because of anti-Jewish sentiments in my hometown.
Okay, thank you very much. I want to conclude and ask you if you have any remarks, each one of you. Mattias, let's start with you. If you want to add something before we're finishing.
I just want to add on this special day when we're recording this, I would like to extend my deepest felt sorrow and compassion with the victims of the Holocaust. And I want to also salute the bravery of all those people, especially the Jewish resistance that fought against the evil of Nazism. And I would also like to say that I think that the Jewish people have more friends maybe than you know. And in some cases, people that are portrayed as enemies of the Jewish people are actually the contrary. I know it's the case with my party and myself. And I think, as I said, that we have a lot in common. And I will continue to stand by Israel. I will continue to fight anti-Semitism at the same time as I'm fighting for the rights for my own people. And I think that especially conservatives in Sweden and Israel should deepen their ties. Thank you very much.
Charlie?
Yes, thank you so much for hosting us today, Eli. And on this day of Holocaust Remembrance, I would like us to remember that if Israel had existed, the Shoah would have never taken place, or would have never cost the lives of so many. This is because if Israel had existed, Jews in Europe would have had a place to go to. That is why the very existence of Israel is tantamount today. Jews should, of course, feel home in Europe, as it is their home. But at the same time, to learn our lessons of the past, we must support a strong Israel and, of course, strong EU-Israeli relations to ensure that Jews in Europe always have a place in the world they can call home. Thank you.
Thank you. Angelika?
Thank you. And I think that we need to tell the story of our families as often as possible for everyone and everywhere. The memory needs to keep on living through the family name for generations. And we must never keep our history as a secret. All the Jewish victims deserves to be heard. And also I think we have to engage in policy matters to take a stand for our Judo-Christian heritage and values. We cannot allow for anyone feeling ashamed, afraid, or not welcomed due to us being Jewish. Sadly, this is not the case in Malmö, as I told you right now, and that is one of the major reasons that I decided to engage in politics and in the Swedish Democratic Party. And during this time of year, I proudly wear my menorah, and I will never forget my family history. Yankian Tashkes.
Thank you very much to all of you. I just want to mention that you have candles behind you. Charlie and Angelika, you light a candle for the International Remembrance Day of the Holocaust. Mattias, you probably have it at home. It was very interesting and fascinating. I hope we will be able to deliver the message, and waiting for more cooperation in the future. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.